Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Let's Dev. Now, 2020 was such a stressful year that I wanted to start the new year on a more calm note. And this led me to an interesting part of Steam where, apparently, digital coloring books have been becoming a thing. One in particular caught my eye by the name of Coloring Pixels, which is a color-by-number style coloring book, only done with pixels. And weirdly enough, it was a very chill experience. It also got my brain tingling and wondering, could I make this in GameMaker? Which brings us to the plan. We're gonna attempt to create our own color-by-numbers pixel coloring book experience, similar to Coloring Pixels. We'll not only recreate the same features found in Coloring Pixels, but we'll also add our own little flair to the project. This will, hopefully, include a dynamic system that'll allow us to take this project to another level. And we'll start on this endeavor today by working on the basics, namely the main experience of Coloring Pixels by numbers. Sounds like possibly too ambitious of a plan. Regardless, let's get to the coding. First was setting up our quote-unquote canvas to draw on. This included a grid with its size based on the sprite we'll be coloring. That grid was then filled with a default array for cell state and color. Next, it was time to generate our data. I wanted to automate the data construction for our canvas, and so the use of GameMaker's getPixel function was used. And since this was a beefy performance hog, this function would have to work fast. So for a single frame, the code would first draw our target sprite to the room. Then, using the getPixel function, the code would then scan the entire sprite and store those colors in the canvas grid. And since our canvas is based off our sprite's dimensions, this is a direct one-to-one copy. And as you can see here, the jumbled text means that the data is being recorded, which means we're on the right track. Next, we had to transfer the data to a list without repeating colors. So a DS list was created. The DS list was then iterated through for each cell, and if a color was not present in said list, an entry for that color was added. Unfortunately, the initial attempt was unsuccessful. Colors would be added to the list just fine, it was the comparison portion that wasn't working. To which I realized I was overthinking things and rewrote the function. The function instead would do the same check and simply return a true or false. Then in the grid coloring function, if the color check came back false, that color is then added to the color list. Much simpler and even better, would actually work as intended, meaning we now had a list of all colors that appear in the sprite we scanned with no repeats. And for reference here, this is the original sprite, and here is our canvas, displaying the same pattern based on the data automatically generated via our functions. And just to prove the dynamic nature of the code worked, and to also test what would happen with transparent cells, I created a new smaller sprite. Switching the sprite source in our code resulted in the same automatic generation process. However, it seems that using the application surface as the source of our getPixel function nullifies a check for transparency, which could be a good thing or a bad thing. Honestly, I'm not exactly sure if there's a way around it, though I have some ideas we'll test out in the future. But for now, it was clear that our canvas could be generated, so we had to add the color part of this coloring experience. Back in the code, a couple variables would keep track of the nearest cell to the mouse's position. Then in the left-click check, said cell would have its state switched on or off. This would then be reflected in the draw code, and just like that, we could now quote-unquote color our canvas. Obviously, the colors chosen were automatic, but for the sake of testing, this was exactly what we needed. So back in the code, things were altered to improve the coloring experience while having the right-click reset a cell altogether. Next, a new function was created to retrieve a color's corresponding number from the color list. This number would be displayed on the grid, so the whole color by numbers thing could be a thing. And once again, while the colors are still automatic, we were able to see that each cell has a number attached to it, which is provided via the function we just wrote. So finally, it was time to add a color picker. For now, a simple color variable was used that would shift through the color list entry by entry. The current color would then be passed on to the left-click check, where it would be applied to a new third value in our canvas grid array. That color was then drawn to the screen instead of its actual color, which means now cells will be colored with the current chosen color and not automatically colored with the proper colors, making this officially a color-by-numbers pixel coloring book thing. Thus, the player now has full control over whether or not to follow the coloring guides. And again, even shifting back to the first example sprite, the data and colors are all generated via the functions. which means with a little extra work, this project can go beyond just the sprites provided in-game. However, there are still a few more features to add before we even entertain that idea. For now, that's all I had time for, which brings us to the end of today's episode of Let's Delve. So leave a like if you enjoyed the episode, subscribe and turn on notifications if you haven't already, and leave your thoughts on our progress in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.